All right, my English teacher friends. So Christian Kuhn coming at you for another writing workshop video, affectionately known as the Bob Ross composition. And man, oh man, do I have something wonky up my sleeve for this video. I'm going to put on full display my Lego Man template. And what we'll do is do a synthesis essay centering around the role of artificial intelligence in education. So I'm making lesson plans for the beginning of the next academic year, and two things I want to tackle right off the bat. I want to talk about cheating in education, the use of AI, and I want to talk about cell phones because those seem to be the nemesis in my pedagogy these days. My fight against cell phones and my fight against cheating. So I'm doing this synthesis essay here around the role of AI in education. And what we'll do is this. So I'll walk you through the prompt that I've created, and then I'm going to show you how we can basically construct a Lego man by pulling all the various strings of my template. So as an example, we know that for the introductory paragraph, kids can either declare or invert, and there's 4 moves within that template of the introductory paragraph. If the kid can do all 4 moves, then they get awarded the head, the eyes, the nose, the mouth of the head. So each time a student satisfactorily completes some aspect of the template, some variable of the template, they get awarded a body part or attribute of the Lego man. Very cool. So synthesis has requisite parts to it. And I've made videos on literary analysis, rhetorical analysis, argument, persuasion, and research. Now I'm doing synthesis, highlighting my Lego man template. So we know that there are requisite parts in a synthesis essay. So introductory paragraph, you need a thesis, right? You need to answer the essential question. We know that we're going to have to embed quotes, incorporate our sources, get those sources talking to each other, sustain a clear and cogent line of reasoning. So how do we do that? How do we ensure that kids can, juggle all of those things simultaneously? So what I'll do during this writing workshop is this. We're going to build the essay while simultaneously building the Lego man. So you'll see how each aspect of my template has a Lego man attribute. So there's a part of the template that comprises the feet, the legs, the arms, the torso, the nose, etc. And I'll walk you through that whole process. So first, let's take a look at the prompt that I've created for this. It states this: the advent of AI programs such as ChatGPT have sparked a change in how people conceive the future of educational instruction. While some commentators posit serious apprehension as to the ways AI obscures the lines between what can be created by people versus what can be created by machines, others see new possibilities for human creativity in the changing landscape of artificial intelligence. So basically, both sides of the debate are presented here, so you can, with most synthesis papers, your thesis is either going to say yes, no, or it depends. You qualify with regards to the essential task, the essential question. So this is what they have to do. This is what students have to do. Read the following sources and accompanying material carefully. Write a letter to your school board in which you express the role you think AI should have in the field of education. So reread that. You're going to write a letter to your school board in which you express the role you think AI should have in the field of education. Synthesize material from at least 3 sources to advance your argument. So I pretty much used the language in the template that the College Board uses for FRQ1. And pretty straightforward. So clearly, in terms of the thesis, you're gonna say yes, more AI, no less AI, or you're gonna qualify it. Before we get into my exemplars and models, and I show you how to cobble this together, I always say this when I work with teachers: you got to Bob Ross your instruction. There's a huge fundamental difference, seismic difference between the assigning of writing and the direct explicit teaching of it. So I always encourage teachers when I work with them to position themselves as the expert writer in the classroom, just as Bob Ross always positioned himself as the expert painter in his show, The Joy of Painting. Each instructional activity, he got to that canvas and easel and he painted his assignment with his students. And I really like it when teachers paint with their students. Paint with them a few declarative theses. Paint with them a few inverted theses. Show them some syllogistic body paragraphs. It's one way to really ensure that you demystify the process. And just like Bob Ross, we're going to use templates. He used a heuristic, also known as a template, called the wet on wet technique every single time he ever painted a natural landscape. And, our students know that you can either declare or invert the thesis, and all body paragraphs can be housed and contained in the syllogistic method. All right, so let's jump right in. First question, kids have read the sources. We've discussed it. We fishbowled it, Socratic seminar, Harkness discussion, whatever. And now it comes time to write. Kids looking at his blank screen or a blank sheet of paper, and they pose this question. So, how do I construct the introductory paragraph? And as always, for those that are familiar with my work, you know that you can either declare or invert. So let me break down both paradigms for you and talk you through, and then I'll show you some concrete exemplars and models. So if you declare the thesis, you quite literally are declaring the thesis. You will begin with the thesis. So dear skill board, here's what I think with regards to the essential question. So you just drop the answer to the essential question right in the opening statement. From there, you got to get a little bit of context and background. Couple of things to note. You are not to quote, you are not to paraphrase, you are not to draw in any of the source material whatsoever in the introductory paragraph. I'm a firm believer in what the College Board states in FRQ 1, your argument must be central. So I only want to hear the student's position here. So context and background from the student, not from the sources. A couple of other things that I like thrown into this triangulated paradigm here. I'll talk about both tier 2 level vocabulary and sentence constructs. Let me start with tier 2. What I mean by that is SAT caliber level words. And students need to cop a certain academic tone for this. It is an academic paper. And I run intensive word study academies throughout my academic year that really enable my students' vocabulary to grow exponentially over the course of their time with me. And I have hundreds and hundreds of activities that I do with them to really help them expand, because I know when I get them in September that there's going to be a vocabulary void. And over the course of my 20 plus career, that's grown exponentially. It's kind of seismic in terms of the void that I get each year. So it really requires a great deal of effort and work and focus, attention from the teacher to help fill that void. So in the student samples you should see a nice level of vocabulary, but they don't overdo it, right? They stay in their wheelhouse. They stay in their lane. None of my students believe the idea that if they use $1 million words, that it's the equivalent of good writing. So they stay right in the sweet spot. Sentence constructs. Let's move on to that. I use a text called Strunk and White's Write It Right. And in that seminal text, they have something called rule number 18. And rule number 18 asserts that there's 12 different ways to cobble together a single sentence. My students are able to make some really good syntactical choices in the hopes of achieving voice, rhythm, and flow. Even if you're not using this assignment as an AP assignment, I still talk about sophistication with my on-level students, even if they're not AP students. I have sophistication points on all of my on-level rubrics. One way to help get toward, a moment of sophistication is breaking that ... rhythm that struggling and emerging writers achieve because they stack independent clauses and short, simple declarative sentences atop each other. So in the exemplars you're going to see, I hope my students have really good voice, rhythm, and flow by manipulating a variety of syntactical features. And then the kicker, all introductions, regardless of expository mode, are going to be 4 sentences long. So that's the declarative. Let's flip this over on its head and take a look at the inverted. So you can see here, we literally flip the triangle over. And the only difference here is that you end with the thesis. So you're going to begin with the context and background. Sometimes students will try a hook or an analogy, which that's totally acceptable if the kid can land it. And as you funnel down towards the fourth sentence constitutes the thesis statement. Same old stuff, context, background, tier 2, sentence constructs, 4 sentences. So here's one of the things I found in Bob Rossing this for my students. We're writing a letter to the Board of Education. And I found with my declaratives that if I just dropped my thesis first line, my tone was rather brusque. It was abrupt, almost confrontational, like I was angry or something of that nature. So that was good, a good practice that I had where I wrote the assignment before I assigned it. And I was able to tell my students, if you declare, make sure that you're not overly combative. You don't want to be confrontational in your tone. So I found that most of my students ended up inverting. All right, enough of my talking into the ether. Let's build this thing together. Let's take a look at 4 exemplars. Some declare, some invert. And here's student number 1. To the Ashbury Heights School Board. So you can see you're writing a letter. So the thesis is either going to come first, last, pay attention to the tier 2, and pay attention to the syntactical manipulations of this student. In making curricular decisions, one must first ask a fundamental question. What is the purpose of an education? Above and beyond ensuring the well-being and nurturance of its scholars, schools have a responsibility to prepare each student for the next stage of their life. Whether this be vocational, military, or academic, schools must help secondary students transition into the next phase as smoothly as possible. For these reasons, a strong focus on AI integration is a vital component to modern-day education. So let me break this down a little bit. We'll go piece by piece. In terms of the Lego man, this is how I've broken everything down. When the student answers the essential question, the thesis, either first sentence or fourth sentence, they get awarded the Lego head. And I probably should have said this earlier. So I know a lot of you guys don't have physical Legos. I equip my kids with boxes of crayons too, and we just draw it out. Or they can make it in Canva or PowerPoint or something of that nature. So you decide: markers, crayons, pencils, straight up sheet of paper. It doesn't matter how you construct the Lego man. So the answer to the essential question is the thesis, and that's going to comprise the head. The context and background sentences, those 3 sentences, student will be awarded the eyes and the brows, and you got to keep in mind what not to do. So no summary, no paraphrase, no quoting, no piggybacking any source theses. Minimum of 2 tier 2 level words. That's arbitrary, but I would like to see some tier 2 level vocab in it. And I thought 2 was a minimum expectation. You get awarded the mouth. Variety of sentence structures is going to award the student hair for their Lego man. And then if their grammar, punctuation, and syntax is flawless, they are allowed to accessorize, so they can add beards and goatees and mustaches and all that stuff. So let's break this down bit by bit. Let's start with the head. This is a classic quintessential inverted thesis. That last sentence is the thesis statement. And let's reread that last sentence together. It says, for these reasons, a strong focus on AI integration is a vital component to modern-day education. That clearly articulates a thesis. It answers the prompt, and the student out of the gate has definitely been awarded the thesis. So this student would get the head. All right, moving on. 3 sentences of context and background. They lead with these 3 sentences. Let's reread these 3 sentences and see if we would award the eyes and the brows. In making curricular decisions, one must first ask a fundamental question. What is the purpose of an education? Above and beyond ensuring the well-being and nurturance of its scholars, schools have a responsibility to prepare each student for the next stage of their life. Whether this be vocational, military, or academic, schools must must help secondary students transition into the next phase as smoothly as possible. So that's kind of like the setup for the dropping of the thesis. It just kind of lays the context, the background. No, we're not quoting, we're not paraphrasing, we're not even mentioning any of the source material. The student is keeping his argument central. And that's perfect example of how to do the context and background. So I would give that kid the eyes and the brows. The next trait is the mouth, and that's the tier 2 level vocabulary. I like some of the wording in here: curricular, fundamental, ensuring, nurturance, vital. Again, the kid doesn't have to overdo it and sound like a walking, talking thesaurus. Just simple, 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 right? But tier 2 academics stay in your wheelhouse. So this kid doesn't sound contrived. They don't sound pretentious. They are in their lane 100%. So the next thing is rule number 18. Did they stagger their sentences? And here's an easy way to detect this and kind of assess it. I tell my students that, especially in the introduction, they probably want to avoid parallel syntax. There's really no need for a student to be paralleling anything in these 4 sentences. So just in eyeballing this, you have some adjective clauses. Student even uses a dash a couple of times. You have a parenthetical statement. This is perfect. So it has great voice rhythm and flow. There's no da-da pattern in this at all. So I would award this kid the part for achieving rule number 18. And then last but not least, grammar, punctuation, syntax. This kid's going to be allowed to accessorize, hence the beard in the last slide there, right? They can add all the accessorization that they want to. Let me speak about grammar, punctuation, and syntax for a second. I run nuance academies early in the academic year where I demand mastery of grammar, punctuation, and syntax. Again, I use Write It Right by Strunk and White. And I have certifications for my academies. My kids earn diplomas. So they have 50 mentor sentences, devoid of punctuation, full of grammatical and syntactical errors. And they have to fix all 50 sentences and have it be 100% correct. In order to graduate from the Nuance Academy, students need to earn 90 or higher. And I literally have some students retake that test 7, 8, 9 times. So I'm emphatic on that. So good writing has to have good command of the fundamentals. So I really ensure that my students have mastered that stuff before I send them on their way, especially my AP students. It's absolutely essential. Okay, doing lots of talking here, but lots of showing as well. So let's do that again. Let's break down student number 2 and see whether or not they declare, invert, tier 2, sentence constructs, 4 sentences. So student number 2 steps to the plate. Here they go. Dear board members, the primary goal of education is to spark intellectual curiosity in each learner of every classroom. But the thing is, there's been a drastic dumbing down of education over the past decade. Not only are students not learning, the system is rigged to guarantee their stupefaction. Instead of integrating more AI into the curriculum, place the focus and funding on the aspects of the traditional paradigm that have worked for centuries, right? So let's break this down together. This student, in a peer edit, made this in Canva, this little figurine here. So you're like, oh, it's got rainbow colored hair and it's got like scars on its face or like a little beard and it's all accessorized here. Did this kid do everything to warrant drawing this Lego man in the margin of their introduction? Well, let's break it down. The last sentence is the head. We have another inverted thesis here. So look at this. It answers the essential question. Instead of integrating more AI into the curriculum, place the focus and funding on the aspects of the traditional paradigm that have worked for centuries. That's clearly a thesis statement there, and they've taken a stance with regards to the essential question articulated or posed in the prompt. So that's done perfectly. It's just a straight up inverted thesis. What about tier 2? I like primary. I even like spark. I think that's a good word. drastic, dumbing down. Let's see here. Rigged, I think is nice. Stupefaction, integrating. Uh, let's see, paradigm. So this student has good tier 2 level words. And again, you don't always have to overdo it. And sometimes using like a little bit of colloquial and vernacular bodes well too in terms of achieving sophistication. I Spy with My Little Eye, it's 4 sentences long. And then some really neat syntactical choices here again. So this kid in their second sentence has that dash. And again, you don't have to go willy-nilly with dashes and colons and semicolons. That's not my point here. But they have really good voice rhythm and flow because they've avoided that parallel syntax trap that a lot of students fall into of stacking independent clauses upon independent clauses. So the grammar, the punctuation, the syntax is flawless. There are no mistakes. So this kid gets it all. Right? That's a perfectly executed inverted thesis. So they got the head, the hair, the eyebrows, the nose, the mouth, and the accessorization points as well. So their Lego man is getting spiffy. All right, pep talk at this stage of the game for those of you that are writing with me and using this in your classroom. Yes, you can. This looks difficult, but you can do it with practice. And teachers, get to the canvas and the easel and paint with your kids. Show them how to do this. So I got 4 examples in here, but they might need to see it a little bit more. Student number 3, going to do the exact same thing. First sentence thesis or fourth sentence thesis. Tier 2, sentence constructs, context background. To the Newport News School Board, if you attest to having the best interest of every pupil in your heart, then please invest in the future by investing heavily in AI integration. Given that goal of a well-rounded education is to ensure the future success of each scholar, our district must put this at the center of our collective attention. To raise a citizenry prepared for the new world, the educational system must adapt and meet these needs. Don't just invest your dollars, invest in our future and give the kids the AI integration that is very much needed. Very cool. I like that. So let's go back to the diagram we were looking at before in terms of constructing the Lego man. If the student answers the essential question, they're going to be awarded the head, the thesis, first or fourth sentence. Context background, the eyes, the brows, minimum of 2 tier 2 level words, the mouth, variety of sentence structures, hair, grammar, punctuation, and syntax will grant the kid the accessorization of the Lego man. So let's go back to this. This is a declarative thesis. Look how they answer the essential question in the first sentence. This is going to give the kid the head. If you attest to having the best interest of every pupil in your heart, then please invest in their future by investing heavily in AI integration. So they told the board what to do. Very good. Now, just quickly spy with your little eye the sentence flow, the variation. You know, I read a lot of college board papers, and I seldom see students use semicolons. And this kid used a semicolon. I seldom see that. I seldom see kids use dashes. So this is where my Nuance Academy is coming into play here. Kids having good syntactical choices. Vocab is nice. I like a test. Let's see here. Integration. Let's see here. Collective attention, citizenry, adapt. And again, you don't have to overdo it. Integration, right? So just 2 is all you need. But this kid definitely has that. You know, they have the 3 context background sentences, which comprise sentence 2, 3, and 4. There's no mention of the sources, no quoting, no paraphrasing the sources. The kid's argument is centralized and very well articulated. No punctuation, grammar mistakes, syntactical mistakes whatsoever. This kid gets the whole kit and caboodle for the Lego man head. All right, let's see it one more time here. Let's take a really basic writer and have them have at it here. So this kid started off, to whom it may concern. If you pour taxpayer dollars into extensive AI integration, you are willfully purchasing the dumbing down of America. AI does not only cheat students from their right to learn, but it creates students who are wholly incapable of individual thought. Not only do these AI measures open the floodgates to rampant cheating, but it breeds intellectual laziness. Clearly, this is antithetical to everything education stands for. So you have another declarative thesis. All the sentence constructs are varied. Vocab is up. I like even things like floodgates, right? Antithetical. Students can use a little bit of colloquial and vernacular as tier 2 level words. And I think it's really nice in terms of achieving voice when they do that. Again, it's 4 sentences. So you either lead with the thesis, end with the thesis, tier 2, context, background, sentence constructs. All day long, students can do this. All right, at this stage of the game, if you are writing with me in your classroom, and using my models and exemplars, then pause the video and have your students write their intros at this stage of the game. And I'm a firm believer of this. The more writing students see, the better they become. So have students share their writing with each other, and teachers, by all means, model as well. Bob Ross your instruction, and let's see lots and lots of writing. Even if it's good, bad, and ugly, you got to see it, right, in order to learn. So the more writing you see, the better you're going to become. All right, intros are done. So which leads us to the next question. So how do I write the body paragraphs? And I've alluded to this already. You're going to bust out the syllogistic method. And I'm going to do a quick flyby of this because I go over it pretty extensively in other videos. And I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with my work. So the syllogistic method comes from Aristotle. He ran a school called the Lyceum, and the townsboys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling, that type of stuff. And they'd often throw out their own juicy essential questions like, what is justice? Which is the central essential question of the seminal text, Plato's Republic. And the scholars, the philosophers would go to the proverbial mic and they would drop their definition of what justice is. And Aristotle, just like us composition instructors, said, why is it that some of my students are really gifted at this? Some are men, some tank bomb it. They're like really discursive and disorganized in how they structure their arguments. And one day he had a eureka moment and he said, aha, I got it. My really good students, the kids who argue very well, argue using something called a syllogism. And it's when you argue from premise, conclusion. And he coined the word cogency. We call it line of reasoning. He said, my really good students establish cogent lines of reasoning. So if I were to say to you, premise number 1, arsenic is deadly, you would say, Christian, you are 100% correct. Like, that's indisputable. That's truth. But then if I were to say, premise number 2, my dog ate arsenic, we're all going to naturally conclude with a big, uh-oh, Christian, that's not going to bode well for your dog. That's a cogent argument. So when students argue on paper, they need to be that mathematical and computative. But how do we take that simple example there of a syllogism and crank it into a template for the purposes of doing synthesis? Well, let's take a look. Let's define the parts. The first premise is going to be an argument containing a why reason. And I'm going to model this for you 3 times. An argument containing a why reason. So if the wheels fall off and the Lego man gets all maimed and kind of distorted and tangled up, the wheels are going to fall off here because kids don't know what a why reason is. And you're really going to need to model this for them. Like I said, I got 3 exemplars on how to do it, but it gets a little tricky. So up top in the thesis, we don't say why. We just say yes, no, or it depends, right, with regards to the essential question. The why reason is reserved for the first premise. This is going to be a 3-sentence move. And again, I'll model that for you. You state the why in the first premise. Textual support is where we got to do all that quoting and paraphrasing. Remember, we have a minimum amount of sources that we have to use. So that's going to come in the shape of the second premise. And then the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. And I really want to emphasize that. Body paragraphs have conclusions. They need to be concluded. Is where you throw your links, your echoes, and your promises back to the prompt and the thesis. All right. So the torso of the Lego man is going to be the why reason. It's going to be the first premise. So let me show you how to do that. But you might ask, how do I write a first premise? And you're searching your brains. What's this look like? So I'm going to get out of the ether, stop opining and bloviating, and show you exactly how to do it. So here are a couple of sentence stems that my students steal from me sometimes. So like struggling and emerging writers might need this scaffold. They might need this training wheel to make sure that they articulate a why reason. If a student says literally the reason why, then they will articulate the why reason. So they might begin their first premise by saying, there is a clear reason as to why, and like the school board should give ample funding towards artificial intelligence, right? And then you state your reason why. It's kind of a gimmick. It's a hack. It's a cheat code to make sure you articulate the why reason. Or if you want to talk about multiple things, you could say there are a couple of reasons why the school board should, and you get into your why reasons. So again, hacks, cheat codes, scaffolds, training wheels, whatever you want to call it, work well to set this up. So let me show you the full 3 sentences here. This is not an all or nothing proposition, but there are several reasons that should give one pause. So this one does say reasons in it. Note that. And this one's known as the enumerated approach. When you're stating more than one thing, and the second sentence begins with the word first, and the third sentence begins with the word second. You enumerate, you list the reasons. So first, the educational system needs to encourage individual thought and the cultivation of logic, the thinking skills necessary to be fully functioning citizen. Second, it would not be wise to disincentivize learning in a setting whose primary goal is the learning of the individual. All right, so here's what we do, all right, and we'll get to this in just a second. I'm just kind of front loading something. The first premise, I often call it a promise. It's the promise to the reader that you're going to sustain a cogent line of reasoning. So now what we do is we go back and reread the first, and we go get all the quotes and or paraphrases that align with statement that says first. Then we go to second, and we get all the quotes and or paraphrases that align with that second. And that's the only thing that can go in our second premise if we are to stay cogent. All right, and I'll show you a whole syllogism in just a second. All right, might be a little confusing, so I'm going to show you 2 more times. Right, so here's one more example of a first premise. Check this out. We're going to get rid of the training wheel and just state a why reason. If one were to juxtapose the scope and vision of education from the one-room schoolhouse of a century ago to the classroom of the 21st century, the differences would not be that drastic, and therein lies the problem. To prepare each learner for the real world, there needs to be a heavy AI presence as early as possible in the schooling of our children, right? Clearly articulated why reason, you know the direction this should go, right? The quotes and the paraphrases should be germane to the why reason articulated in these 3 sentences. So let's talk real quick about what does not go in these 3 sentences. Again, no mention of the sources, because our argument's going to be central. No quoting, no paraphrasing, no mention whatsoever of any of the sources. All right, so we're getting through this here. The first premise, just to restate it, 3 sentences, award the torso if it's done correctly. So I've already alluded to this. You got to go quote hunting. So when I'm done, in terms of like when I Bob Ross my writing for my students, I write my first premise, I pause, and I go quote hunting. I got to get all my paraphrases and all my quotes aligned for my second premise. So I get into the sources and I go cherry pick everything I need so that I therefore can keep the promise of the first premise and stay cogent and have an absolute deliberate, like mathematical line of reasoning. So back to the Lego man. In the body paragraphs, we're going to construct the body pretty much of our Lego man. So the declarative and the inverted thesis, as we saw, is the head in all things associated with the head. A syllogistic body paragraph is going to be 10 to 12 sentences. I'm a huge contender of the following fact. Students that write those 4 or 5 sentence baggers, there's not going to be enough support or analysis in there to really advance and flesh out an argument. These things need to be, on the pithy side. So 10 to 12 sentences is what my students shoot for. To award the kids the arms of the Lego man, each quote must wrap around a promise of the first premise. So kids need to learn to quote with deliberation. Oftentimes their quotes break their line of reasoning. They just kind of willy-nilly their way through their quote and paraphrase selection and therefore break the line of reasoning. So the arms are going to be like a big hug, like this Lego man's going to hug himself. The quotes need to be germane to the promise of the first premise. The hands get us into embedded quotes. We know that we need sources. We have a minimum amount that we have to use. And I call it the 5-word rule. We have 5 fingers. So the 5-word rule works perfect for this. Before quotes, if a student uses a minimum of 5 words before the quote and keeps the quote relatively small and brackets when needed, the quote should sound conversational and be perfectly smoothly embedded, right? So as we already said, the torso is going to be the first premise. Spiffy attire, tier 2 level words, sentence constructs, and then the legs are going to be the syllogistic conclusion. It's like 2 or 3 sentences where you have your links, your echo, and your promise. So let's do this from top to bottom. Let's take a look at a student example here. So we already looked at this first premise. Let's just revisit it. This is not an all or nothing proposition, but there are several reasons that should give one pause. First, the educational system needs to encourage individual thought and the cultivation of logic, the thinking skills necessary to be a fully functioning citizen. Second, it would not be wise to disincentivize learning in a setting whose primary goal is the learning of the individual. So now we need quotes and paraphrases for the first and the second. Let's see what that looks like on paper. 4th sentence begins the second premise, which I've identified on this slide. I tell my students, 4th sentence, get into your sources, right? Have the sources start helping you keep the centrality of your argument, right? Get some support, stand on some shoulders, and really hammer your argument. So look at how this student transitions. Take, as a classic example, the story of Sam Gussup, the MIT freshman who duped admissions. Do you see how you're already in the sources? Early in his junior year of high school, Gussup learned that an AI device could effortlessly write each of his academic papers with the skill and alacrity of a veteran English professor. Source C. Let's talk about that 5-word rule real quick. After admissions, there's a period. Put your attention there and count each word that comes before the quote. So starting with early, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, drop the quote. You see a bracket in the quote, and it sounds totally conversational. If you were to ask your students to close their eyes and not look at this and you read it, I always tell my students, can you hear the transition into and out of the quote? And they nod their heads no. And I'm like, that's exactly how you need to do it. We don't want to hear the transitions. No quote dumping. So that 5-word rule works very well for this, but you're going to have to teach your kids how to bracket. So we quoted, we have to analyze it. From this point going forward, he never wrote an authentic paper on his own. He fed the teacher's stupid prompt into the browser, and voila, out came a polished essay destined to wow any composition instructor. So 2 quotes from source C. And again, this student did the 5-word rule. Not only did Gussup do this for his schoolwork, but he did it for all of his college admissions essays. But the irony of the situation is this: the stupidity of the individuals like Sam and Ian Withers that who then in turn boast of their cheating on social media only to get kicked out of their prospective schools. Withers, a kid who cheated himself into Harvard, arrogantly advertised his conquest in a YouTube video that went viral. Source E. So you don't always have to quote, right? Whenever you reference, drop the source. So we got two sources in here. One of his professors said it best. Clearly, Withers found a loophole in AI, but AI can't equip kids with basic common sense. All right. And then they got to put the source there after that. So this is really cool because all of the quotes and or paraphrases are germane to what we promised you in those opening 3 sentences of the first premise. But we're not done. You can't end a paragraph on a quote. We got to conclude this. So let's add the legs, right? So the legs of the Lego man are going to constitute and be comprised of the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. So you got to echo it back to the prompt and the thesis. So look at this conclusion to get the legs. Funding extensive AI integration makes very little sense unless the goal is to discourage the learner from learning. To ensure the integrity of assignments and the virtue of the task at hand, the district needs to re-embrace more traditional practices, which front loads the next body paragraph, right? So you do a little bit of front loading in the conclusion for what's coming next. And that kid would be awarded the legs. So, was it spiffy? Do they get the accessorization point, the grammar, the punctuation, the syntax looking good? Same idea in terms of voice, rhythm, and flow. Same idea for tier 2 that we talked about in the intros. It's all there. So this kid's crushing it. That's a perfectly cogent syllogistic body paragraph. But we're not done. What do we do next? You can't just write an intro in one body and call it a day. Here's the kicker, my friends. You bust out another syllogism. So this essay is going to be 4 paragraphs long. That's exactly what my students do on the AP exams for Lit and Lang. Every FRQ, all 6 of them are 4 paragraphs when my students do it. If you're writing syllogistic body paragraphs of 10 to 12 sentences, you don't need that third body paragraph, right? It's just not necessary. Everything can be said in 4 paragraphs. So let's play it again. Let's see how we would do this from top to bottom. Just going to choose a different student writer and show how they do it. So the first premise, again, is going to be the torso. 3 sentences that articulate the why reason. If one were to juxtapose the scope and vision of education from the one-room schoolhouse of a century ago to the classroom of the 21st century, the differences would not be that drastic, and therein lies the problem. To prepare each learner for the real world, there needs to be a heavy AI presence as early as possible in the schooling of our children. So I'm assuming that the quotes and paraphrases are going to show this juxtaposition between old school, new school, and then a heavy focus on what does real world mean? So what's real world preparedness within a secondary education landscape within that scope. So 4th sentence, just like the last one, begins the second premise. And again, I tell my kids, get into your sources. So either quote and or paraphrase. Start piggybacking somebody so that you can make a really strong argument. Bradford Wilson, one of the world's foremost AI experts, cites the English classroom as one case in point. Over the decades, the subject is still heavily literature-centric, which does not match the literacies needed to thrive in today's economy. Source B. This kid used the 5-word rule as well, and it's a very conversational, silky smooth, embedded quote. It's perfect. So we quote, we got to analyze. The truth of the matter is this. Students are graduating from high school very well versed in the likes of Shakespeare and Dickinson, but are they literate in the technologies needed to be a contender in the global marketplace? This is where AI can help. All right, so now we got to go on to other sources. Let's have Kim Smithers talk to the first source here, Bradford Wilson. So Smithers is going to build on Wilson, right? This is where, in AP Lang for FRQ1, we get in contention for the sophistication point. Our sources need to talk to each other. Their arms, they hug each other. Kim Smithers needs to hug Bradford Wilson. Kim Smithers, like Wilson, suggests that secondary educators need to go back to the drawing board and prepare themselves to teach their students the real science and math of the 21st century. Source D. Everything has evolved as the result of technological advancements, but it appears as if the educational system is still stuck in the days of antiquity. The graph in source E is a great case in point. At the 5 largest businesses in the United States, CEOs report that their employees who had a lot of AI integration with their schooling are the best and brightest prospects, as well as the most productive and reliable. All right, we got a bunch of quotes and or paraphrases that are all germane and linked to the promise of the first premise. Award this kid the arms of his Lego man. But we're not done. We still need our legs. We got to wrap up this syllogistic body paragraph. Again, just a couple of sentences. Clearly, to bridge the education gap, one must invest in AI to prepare students for what is next, which is the aim of an education. This is the one sure shot direction the district can go. I got all tongue-tied there. That was like a riddle or something. So you can see there in the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph, you link it all back to the prompt and the thesis. It comes full circle. Again, 10 to 12 sentences is all it takes. This kid's punctuation is flawless. The grammar is flawless. The syntax is flawless. Good voice, rhythm, flow. They definitely can accessorize this Lego man. So again, those painting with me, you might want to pause here and have your students work on their first premises. Go quote hunting, go paraphrase hunting, and stack it all together. Teacher, easel, canvas, model. Bob Ross, your instruction. All right, we got to wrap this essay up. And our Lego man still does not have feet. So what are we going to do? We need to have a conclusion paragraph. I keep my conclusion paragraphs very basic and simple. And what I do is this. I have about 15 sentence stems, and my students steal the stems and just kind of have like a thematic fireworks crescendo at the end. Kind of like main idea, right? And you just like really hammer your point. So this student used my sentence stem of simply said, comma. So this is a good transition to end things. Simply said, the school board really needs to carefully consider how they allocate their funds. In every conceivable way, investing heavily in AI is quite simply not the way to go. Please invest in authentic learning and not quick fix gimmicks. Right? So you just really hammer your thesis in the end here, right? Big fireworks display. Hammer it home like a lawyer when you're arguing. So for like synthesis, straight up argument, and persuasion, research, these are the types of conclusions I like to see. All right. And then as always, if you get through the end of the paper and your grammar, your punctuation and syntax is relatively flawless, accessorize, jazzercise that Lego man, and decorate him at will. Give him any affect you want. All right. So here's the kicker. All right. We have to talk about this. This template here, this Lego man template, sets you up to do some really, really cool alternative grading methods. And some of you might know me from the ELA circuits. I've done a lot of work in my career with alternative grading methods. I think the traditional grading paradigm is for the birds. It robs us of our evenings and weekends, and it's really futile, I think, in terms of helping students to grow and mature as writers. So I've totally rethunked how I use alternative grading methods. Let me give you a real quick example of how I would grade these essays. Pure editing typically doesn't work in my observation, my experience, because kids don't share a common language. When you have students embrace your templates and utilize your templates, they all have shared language. And then you throw in your word study academies and your nuance academies in there as well. Your students have a whole lexicon upon which to discuss this. So what I do is this. I put my desk in squares. So we have these little small tiny desks. So I cluster them in groups of 4 that literally looks like a square. So 4 kids gather around each other. And the rule is you come to class with your printed essay. I have crayons and I have paper. Each kid gets a box of crayons and each kid gets an essay that does not belong to themselves. And basically, I tell them this: you have to draw a Lego man for your peer, for the writer, for the author of the paper. And if it's missing something, you're going to give them their Lego man missing the hair, missing the eyes, missing the arms, missing the feet, right? Whatever's missing, don't draw it. And then the kid has to figure it out. The author has to figure it out. I also do this when I grade. If I want to do a traditional grading method and I want authorship, kind of like ownership of the student's writing, I will draw them Lego men and give it back. And they have to figure out why I omitted the hair or why I omitted the arms, why I omitted the feet. And they have to go to their peers with their paper and seek the answer. It's really cool exercise. It's a really cool exercise. So with the crayons, I just have my students draw the Lego man and then they conference with each other, peer edit, and it lends itself to a very nice revision exercise. It works like a charm, but you need that common language. Otherwise, the peer edit's not going to work. All right, it's time to wrap this up. So let me finish by saying happy teaching and happy writing. And let me give you some contact information in case you have questions or want to reach out to me or anything of that nature. teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com is the best way to get in touch with me if you need anything or have any questions. Also note that I'm a lead teacher for the National Writing Project, and we have professional development opportunities all calendar year. And one of the things we're doing this summer is our FRQ boot camps and AP FRQ boot camps. So we're going to do one for Lang and Lit. We have my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind, my self-paced course, alternative grading method courses, Nuance Academy, Word Study Academy. So we're to the gills. We're always offering really good PD, very affordable. If you want any information on that, teachinghowtowrite.com. You'll also note in the description here of this video, if you want the source packet that we used to get all of our quotes and our paraphrases and whatnot, there's a link to access that. And if you want the slides that accompany this video, just click the link and you shall have at it. All right, my folks, be well. I hope this serves you well, and I hope it was very edifying and gratifying. So be well, take care.